The legendary Infinity Stones have been widely regarded as some of the most powerful artifacts in the known universe to date, having the capability to cause universal destruction on an intergalactic scale when unified, and when separated, each individual stone holds immense individual power that can cause dire planetary calamity. In the comics, the precedent set was that the Infinity Stones' power are limited to their own universes, but with the recent reawakening of the multiverse in the MCU, we seem to have hints that this might not be the case in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Therefore, we wanted to explore a few potential explanations for why this might be the case, and see if we could uncover a few different possibilities as to why these rules seem to be different from comics to the MCU. While none of these explanations are canon and are speculative based on the evidence we have been given, we still believe that these would be plausible reasons that could explain why the Infinity Stones are seemingly able to work across different universes. This of course obviously pertains to the What If episode 8, where Ultron assembles all 6 of the Infinity Stones within his chassis after defeating the Mad Titan Thanos. It makes complete sense over the first half of the episode that Ultron is able to command the 6 stones within the confines of his universe, because the stones were assembled in the Big Bang and created within his universe. However, when he later in the episode battles the Watcher, why are the Infinity Stones still active and functioning? And how are the Infinity Stones able to be used appropriately and in the same manner outside of the universe in which they were born? In the comics, as we stated just briefly, this is not the case, and an Infinity Stone will only work in the universe that it originates from. If it is removed from another universe, as we similarly see in Loki, it will not function as it does, as it is no longer a pillar in the current universe, just again as we saw in Loki with the Infinity Stones being used as paperweights. Therefore, we wanted to explore a few potential explanations for why this might be the case, and see if we could uncover a few different possibilities as to why these rules seem to be different from comics to the MCU. While none of these explanations are canon, and are speculative based on the evidence we have been given, we still believe that these would be plausible reasons that could explain why the Infinity Stones are seemingly able to work across different universes, despite what we see in What If and what is explained in Loki. The primary reason that we'll be covering today is the idea that each timeline that we see in the multiverse is actually a branch of the same baseline universe. In Loki episode 6, we see 2 different universes, one of which seems to represent our own and another that seems to represent the MCU and specifically the sacred timeline. When the timeline splits near the end of the episode, however, it's still contained to this one home universe, and it stands to reason that every alternate reality that we see in the MCU from here on still takes place within one umbrella universe. This would imply the term multiverse isn't actually entirely accurate, as we're not actually traversing different universes, but we're instead exploring different realities caused by splits in the timeline that are all contained to the same universe. We're looking essentially at different realities, not universes themselves. Really confusing, we know. Though this would imply that the use of the word multiverse is highly colloquial and not entirely correct. This is seemingly a minor detail that can reasonably be accepted for the betterment of the story being told. The Infinity Stones work by controlling and manipulating the fundamental aspects of the universe, the baseline components that come together to create what we recognize as existence itself. These ingredients consist of energy forces manipulated by each of the respective stones: space, time, reality, soul, mind, and power. Wong even refers to the stones as remnants of the 6 singularities that make up the fundamental foundation of the universe, and each of the stones can trace their origins back to the Big Bang. Each timeline we see is likewise able to trace their origin back to this same event, the birth of the universe, meaning that their timelines are built on the same foundation as any other timeline that we see. These realities are all still fundamentally based in the same 6 singularities, and the fabric of the universe is uniformly the same on a molecular and elemental level across all realities. Essentially, what we're saying is that all of the realities that we encounter in What If are made of the same things, the same 6 singularities. None of the timelines we see have universal elements that are unique to just them. nor does any universe have a seventh singularity, and none of them seem to have any sort of foundational deviation from their counterparts across what we know as the multiverse. None of them are missing a singularity, none of them have an extra, and none of the 6 singularities are different across any of these different realities. We obviously still believe that each reality has 6 Infinity Stones and are essentially related, cloned copies of other realities that we see. In our previous video, we have a great comment by the ultimate god of gaming, who explains it like this. The reason Ultron is able to use the stones outside of his universe is that he's not actually going outside of his universe. He's just traveling to other timelines. He's able to use the stones in other timelines because they're all a part of the same universe, just different branches of it, just like a tree. The only difference between universes is how particular events carry out across the timeline, and none of the different timelines can attribute their uniqueness to something that is fundamentally different with their own fabric of reality. Meaning that if the stones can tap into said fabric, then they would theoretically be viable across any timeline, since the basic elements of existence don't change across the timelines we see. If the quote-unquote ingredients of the universe are the same, and the timelines branch out and create different realities while still being contained within the same universe, then the Infinity Stones could reasonably be viable across any reality in the What If series, so long as they split from the sacred timeline at some point after the Big Bang, and not a separate universe entirely, like we speculate Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man universes are. We think that they are actually separate universes, not deviations from the sacred timeline. The other explanation that we'll be touching on is the idea that the MCU is just blatantly deviating from the comics lore and is accepting that the same rules of the stones and the multiverse do not apply to the MCU for the sake of the story. We have to remember that while the MCU is based on characters and storylines from the comics, the MCU is still its own entirely separate entity that can change its rules and regulations however it sees fit to tell the best story possible. There is no law beyond the rule of public perception that states that the MCU has to follow the same rules and storylines as the comics on which it is based. In Loki though, it is explained that the Infinity Stones do not work because the TVA exists outside of time and reality itself. The TVA is based outside of the sacred timeline. It's made of different stuff, which is why the Infinity Stones don't actually work there. We also want to make it clear that we prefer the first explanation that was given, and don't actually like to look at it from an out-of-universe perspective. Nonetheless, we felt it was important to point out and distinguish. In the comics lore, branching universes are created in the same way, by making different decisions at different points in the time, and splitting the flow of the timeline. And these branches can exist in infinite combinations. In the comics, Reed Richards discovers that the stones don't work across different timelines, and we fully acknowledge that the explanation that we've been given would still challenge the comic precedent. We are looking for a viable explanation based on the rules that the MCU has given us so far. Therefore, we find the first explanation to be far more likely. We do still need to address the possibility that the fundamental laws of the MCU simply do not work the same way as its comic counterparts and origins. That would mean that effectively there is no canonical explanation because there is no problem. This is just the way things work in the MCU because again, the MCU is not directly tied to the comics. It is instead merely based on the comics, and changes are liable to happen at any time for any reason. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of these explanations? Which do you like better? And what do you think the ramifications are of the Infinity Stones seemingly being able to work across different realities and timelines? What do you think of the fact that we're actually in the same universe, just different timelines and realities branching apart from one another, all deviations from the sacred MCU timeline? As always, my friends, thank you guys so much for watching the channel. Hit that subscribe button to assemble and join our team, and have a great day.